So that said, an interesting thing this movie does, it's by no means something that Tarantino invented, but it's something he since has become known, is a nonlinear timeline in his movie. This one jumps around quite a bit. In particular, something that's interesting about this movie is we never see the main thing that happens. Earlier in the film, these guys are planning a big job. We then cut to after the job. We never see the jewel thievery itself. We don't see Mr. Blonde going completely psychotic and killing civilians and all these sorts of things.
Well, we don't even know that they're planning that during the first scene either. Yeah, I mean, imagine going into this for the first time in 1992 and just sitting down and being like, okay, it's a bunch of dapper lads just having a crass conversation about Madonna, and then all of a sudden, like, oh my God, what happened to him?
And relating to the first scene as well, I will say the one character who I knew deserved to die all along was Mr. Pink, who doesn't tip. And he didn't want to tip the nice waitress at the diner they were at. And already I'm just like, I hope this guy dies.
I think that character was based on, I think he said he based that character on her. I can't remember her real name, but I think it's at Suri_Patel 22.
Oh, I think it was. I think he had met like a 4-year-old Serbi who already at that age was like, fuck tipping. I hate this. For anyone who's listening to this and has never listened to the Wisecrack podcast Culture Binge, we're referring to Culture Binge host Serbi, who has made comments in the past indicating that she doesn't always think tipping is a necessary social good. But is what it is. But so I don't know if you can imagine the first time you watch this film and rewatching it, what do you think about that leap in the narrative? What purpose do you think it serves that very soon, I think right after the credit sequence, we are jumping towards one of our characters dying of a bullet wound in the back of a car. Something has already happened. We're not quite sure what it was. What effect do you think that has on the film?
Sure. I think it's kind of interesting, the sort of trading on the audience's awareness of like, oh, you've seen a heist film, you've seen movies about cops and robbers and what have you. And this is we talked before recording a little bit about City on Fire, the movie that he is sort of indexing off of with this film. A lot of people accuse him of ripping it off. He acknowledges it and says it was definitely inspired by City on Fire. But if you watch City on Fire, it's really like the last 15 minutes of the movie he sort of pulls into an hour and a half. And I think that's instructive with regards to your question, because you can kind of see how someone like Tarantino, who has this encyclopedic knowledge of film, has probably seen so many crime movies, so many heist movies, so many gangster flicks, and has never seen one that deals almost exclusively with the fallout of their choices or their actions, and seeing how that would be the kind of thing that gets his creative juices flowing in a way. And then, he turns on City on Fire and he's watching it and he's getting a very good but somewhat standard crime film. And then by the end of it, he goes, oh, okay, but it seems like there's a lot of juice here that I could definitely wring out if I sort of zoom in and focus on the characters. And I think to the extent that this film succeeds, that is sort of its stroke of genius, is that not only does it really sort of home in on the kind of stuff that usually gets sort of shunted to the sidelines of a more traditional crime movie, it's also compelling at the same time. It finds its own internal drama that is facilitated by the events that happen prior to the film, but not necessarily like driven by those events. This still becomes a clash of personalities, and we just sort of have the heist be their shared backstory. But I don't know. How do you feel about that decision? Because it's certainly one that could be divisive for folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does something really interesting, which is upset, and I mean upset in a very literal sense, expectation. I think you watch this movie for the first time and you think, okay, we have the setup of there's some characters are getting into something. Now we're going to find out what the plan is. And in a traditional movie like this way, maybe the whole first and second act might be preparation for and getting into the act. And at the very end of the film, we see it go down. We deal with some problems, whatever. So it's great that it rips the rug out from under you and leaves you thinking, it leaves you less confident in your ability to know what's going to happen. I think you made that point before that Tarantino has watched more films of this genre than anyone. And I think he does do a good job of like putting you in a position where even if you're someone that loves this genre, you're a little bit thrown off. I think the other thing it does, which is interesting, is kind of fills in different details about different characters at different points, which mean that you kind of watch the film both ways. And so I think the film itself is, of course, nonlinear. I think it creates I'll sound like Austin for a second, a subject position in which time is going in both directions. And but I think it's true. Like there's points of the film where then you learn things. And of course, especially with Mr. Orange, when we learn that he's a cop, you then are watching the film backwards as well. Reconsidering things that have happened earlier in the film. The same thing that happens with some of the backstory stuff with both, Mr. White and Mr. Blonde, which makes it an interesting film to watch because it invites reconsideration as the film is going. Of course, also makes a rewatch great. And I do think it's the sort of movie where if you watch it for the first time, it wouldn't be insane for you to want to watch it again very soon. So that's the stuff I would say for me with like the nonlinearity, which I think works. I think it's an essential part of the movie. However, there's a little bit of that for me, where I'll describe it this way: it's a movie where, as I watch it, it's like I feel like a parent that gets mad at you or a teacher because you don't reach your potential. You come home with a report card and mom and dad are like, oh, Raymond, you got a B-, but we know you're our A+ boy. I think to an extent, the landing of the film, I don't know where it should have gone, but it feels a little bit like it didn't hit the heights it was capable of. And I think to an extent, the structure of it does that. And I think the warehouse limits things. Maybe I'm just being hyperbolic here because I want to throw some gas on the fire, throw some gas on the undercover cop. But I don't know. I wonder if the convention of not having that commitment to nonlinearity at all limits then the storytelling potential.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying because it's very purposefully a sort of small scale film. And I do think, watching it, watching it just a few hours ago, I really love the cut to black in this. I love the needle drop. I love the sort of undercutting of the violence and all of that, and these sort of cheerful chords coming in. And I think all of that's really effective. But for me, I think one of the things that two things. Your argument that being contained to the warehouse maybe limits its potential. I don't necessarily think that's untrue. I can see how people perceive that. I also think, though, once you kind of commit to that conceit, I think it would sort of compromise the film's integrity to like go beyond those walls and end in like a really big conflagration, the likes of which you kind of hear happening outside the warehouse with gunshots and Steve Buscemi screaming and stuff like that.
That's true. True.
But I also agree with you that there's a sense that it maybe feels a little too tidy by the end of it, in that, in his last moments, Tim Roth uses his dying breath to admit that he's a cop, which essentially seals his fate. And maybe he's trying to, but I do think that's maybe instructive because he at that point could be trying to unburden himself of a certain guilt that he feels, because regardless of whether or not Mr. White is a good guy, he's been decent to him and he feels like he's let him down. And I was kind of, kicking that around in my head after this watch of like, he couldn't have just made it 10 more seconds before confessing to this guy. Maybe you could have gotten to a hospital. Maybe you could have made it out all right.
Yeah.
But there is a certain beauty, even if it is maybe too convenient or too tied off, that he does feel a sense of responsibility to Harvey Keitel by the end of it. How do you feel about that?
Well, I do think that's one of my favorite. I'm going to contradict myself a little bit in that I don't know if I love where the film lands in consideration of the whole story. I love that final moment when Harvey Keitel, after getting his wing clipped in a good old fashioned Mexican standoff, crawls over to the Tim Roth character and sort of cradles him. They're both dying. And just that idea too, that this is Harvey Keitel's character is so caring towards this person whose government name he doesn't really, I don't think, knows in that moment. And the way in which Tim Roth's character, like you just said, he might be able to pull this. He might be able to live, basically. There's a chance there. But it seems like he is overwhelmed by that care and commits to his humanity before he commits to his profession as undercover cop.
And it makes the betrayal all that more, so much more potent that Harvey Keitel thought there was some honor among thieves.
For sure. I mean, I think that was, it was kind of like the one thing it seems like he's holding on to there. So, I mean, I think that was played very well. And like we kind of said before, I think Keitel just crushes this movie.
On that note, unless you did you have something you wanted to segue to? I was going to say on that note, the sort of honor among thieves, one of the things that stuck out to me on this rewatch was how Tarantino really, one of the reasons I love The Sopranos is that the show knows how stupid all these guys are, and it's not trying to make The Godfather. It's not, it's not sexy. They're not all in control. There's, and this movie kind of has that streak running through it a little bit too, which is that no, these are bad guys, and they may walk in slow-mo and look cool and stuff, but at the end of the
Hey guys, if you want to hear the rest of the conversation, make sure to find us on your podcast application of choice. And if you want to support Show Me the Meaning or Culture Binge, subscribe and then rate and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks as always for watching. I'll catch you later.